Cool. So now it's demo time. So I'm going to show the project. After I show it, I'll show you guys how you can download it and get started when we get to the assignment. But let's take a look here. So what I'm going to show, I'm going to open up Unity. I'm going to open up the project for the course. And then there's a couple key scenes I'm going to show. One is the hello world, which is the Unity version of what we just spoke about. That simple button that you can click says hello world. Then I have a dedicated scene for doing UI Toolkit in a asteroids game. We'll take a look at that in isolation. And then the third one, which I know the numbering's a little odd there, but the third one we'll get to is now I have this very complete simple game with that same layout being used in the context of a game. So let's take a look at that. And also, let me think of when I want to do this. Maybe after those three, I will show, let me create an empty scene. And here, let me add a new thing in UI Toolkit to an empty scene, because you guys are going to need that for your assignment that you do. All right, so I will leave that open and I will toggle over to Unity. So here we have Unity. Are you guys all seeing my Unity shared? Okay, cool. So here's regular old Unity. This is the sample project. I'm happen to be using 2022.3, which is brand new. But if you have last week's, that's fine. You'll still be able to use it last week's. That's totally cool. And the sample project's got some different example scenes here. So the first thing I wanted to look at is the hello world demo. So let's look at that. So here's that hello world. I'm going to hit play and I'm going to click. So it says hello world loaded and click me. And then as I click, it says you clicked the status button 4 times, right? Now, this is the game window here. And as always with Unity, you can tweak the aspect ratio of how it kind of fills up that scene. So I could make it a little bigger. I can choose a dedicated number of pixels, so 1000 by 1600, which is approximately a phone. That's what I had before. And you can see that the layout changes a little bit. This one doesn't scale in the same way as before. So as you're playing around with this technology, just like Unity in general, always be aware of this little screen. There's no real wrong answer, but if, for example, I went to 16 by 10, it's going to look a little wider instead of tall. And you can have that scaling behavior be tweaked, just like you could in the previous system. So let's take a look at the structure here. So in the scene, I've got a script here, which is specific to how the behavior works, but it's the UI document that describes the UI. So I mentioned that the UI Toolkit is not game object based in most of how it works, but you still need to anchor the complete layout somewhere in your scene. So you do that by creating a new game object of any name you want. Then you add the existing UI document component on it. And then you drag in 2 different things. The panel settings, which is kind of like Canvas in the old system. It's like squash, stretch, how should the whole screen behave when we change aspect ratio. And then there's the source asset. Now, again, I'll be showing how to create this from scratch a little later, but let's just open that up. So here's our first look at the Uxml file inside the UI builder. So here in the middle is the viewport, and I'll make that nice and big so we can see that part. And then here at the bottom, we have the text preview. So it's showing the Uxml and the USS for this particular one. We're going to kind of get away from that for now. So we know it's down there, but I'm not really going to focus on that. I'll focus more on the drag and drop experience. So here in the upper left is any style sheets that we have. I've got one with a couple different styles. You can see as I mouse over them, they give me really nice in context. This style is being applied to this particular element. So that's quite cool. Then we have the hierarchy. This is showing me the structure. So now I get a similar kind of visual feedback, but now it's about the structure that I'm clicking through. The structure is quite simple. It has a context visual element, and then a label, another label, and then a button. So I'm using those 3 fundamental, well, I guess 4 pieces. I'm using the visual element that I said is oh so important, and then I'm using label, and I'm using button. Then down here in the library, if we wanted to add more to the layout, we would use that. I'll show a little demo of that a little later. But here we've got this here. Now, if I click on the, let's say, title text, then quite interestingly over here is the inspector that shows details about that. Now, I think one of the most confusing things about learning Unity in the beginning is like when you hit play and then you tweak something in the inspector and then you unclick play, you lose those changes. So that's kind of off the subject, but I'm just mentioning it because that's like confusing to people when they get into Unity. When you jump into UI Builder, I think that's something confusing, is that you can tweak these values in the inspector two different ways, and it looks really, really similar. So I'm just calling it out as kind of a learning experience that I had. So if I click on something in the hierarchy, so I'm clicking on the label itself, I get the full inspector values here, and I can tweak any of them, right? So I'll get deeper into that, but that's the first way. Or I can come up to a style sheet and I can click the title text, and the inspector shows me all the same stuff, but just that there's a difference here. If I have the style selected, I'm tweaking properties on the style. If I have the visual element selected, I'm doing inline changes to the particular element. And you can do both. There's an appropriate use of both. But I'm just make sure you know where you're clicking on the left before you start tweaking some values. So let's try a little bit of both. Let's say I wanted to add a brand new text label. So I'm going to drag one up and put it at the top here. And I'll come up here to the inspector, and there's attributes at the top, and I will change the label to like, here is new label. All right. So there I'm doing it on the visual element itself. And let's say I wanted to change one of the presentation properties. So I could come down here. These are all in the Unity's basic defaults. Let's say that I wanted to give it a border that is green of a certain size, like, oops, like that. No, that didn't quite do it. Yeah, why aren't we seeing a border there? Am I seeing a border? Okay, there we go. I just had the alpha off. So I'm able to put a border around that text. Give it a 3-point border. Okay, so there I'm applying a style to this particular text element. And if I was to duplicate that by just Control D or Control C, Control V, I'll put it right next to the other one, we can see that they both, because I've copy and pasted the first one, they both have that same style applied. Now, if I go to the label here and I decide I don't want that border anymore, let me set it to 0. Notice that I've only tweaked one of the inline styles. If I want these two to forever match each other in whatever future styles I add, that's where a style becomes useful. A selector. So let's see how I would do that. So let me delete this one here. I'm going back to just having one. I go up here. There's a couple different ways that I could do this, but if I want to add a new style, I can do it here on the right. And I'm going to call this the new label style. So the convention borrowed from the web is to start all classes with a period. So I do period, new label. This text might be quite small, particularly for you guys in the live chat, because I know the full screen, quote unquote, it's not quite full screen, but I'm typing dot new label. Now, what I can do is hit add style class to list, which will make it a style, or I can do extract inline styles to new class. So now this is going to take anything that I've done up to this point, which is this green circle around the border, and it's going to move it up into, oh, I've got to do it again. There was a little bug, it just didn't take. So new label style and then extract inline. Okay, let me try saving the layout. It was only when I didn't save. So a little weirdness. I just needed to hit Control S to save before and after key things. That's some of the weirdness that I was mentioning. Let me just make sure that I have this applied. Okay. So I'm just going to hit Control S before and after everything. Up here where in the tab it says UI Builder, it shows an asterisk if there's anything unsaved. Normally in life, I wouldn't be so worried about it, but I've experienced some weirdness. So I'm just going to hit Control S quite frequently as this demo goes on. So now that I've got that style created, it exists up here in new label. So now I will add the, what would we like to have? The border. So I'll make a red border. I'll make sure that I give it some alpha, which was the tweak that I didn't do last time. And then we apply it. Good. Now I'll go back and do the copy paste from last time, putting it up here. So we kind of have the same result, but here's the key thing. As long as I single click the style before making any changes again, I can now tweak the color to green and both of them get updated. Now this is, maybe if you're from the web, this might seem very normal and you're used to that. But the distinction is if I single click a label in the hierarchy, it's going to be a individual change. If I single click the style that's applied, it's going to go globally across all of them. So you can certainly do both. You're going to have some things you want consistently in how they look, and you want to make some exceptions. You could certainly pepper into each of them there. So let me pause right there and see, do you guys have any questions about anything I showed so far? Okay, I'm good. All right, you guys are good. So let me show one other thing here. So up in the top of the viewport, I can click preview. It gives me this orange box around the layout. And now as I'm mousing around, it's acting like a runtime user. So I'm able to get some things like, it's not the full experience. It doesn't really respond with the C# behind any button clicks, but at least it gives me mouse over states and stuff like that. So I'm able to see that, oh, look, this has not just, I don't know how the frame rate is for you guys, but this is actually a smooth change from as I mouse over. It doesn't instantly get larger. It gets larger over a couple frames. So let's just see how that's done. Well, Web Standards supports something called a style, which is the button one here. And then if you give a name style colon state, like dot button colon hover, that is an existing pseudo state that comes in when I hover over an element. And there's some other ones, but hover is a very key one. So if I apply that to my button, which I've already done, and then I make the hover, I can suggest in the hover, well, what are the few things that should change when I hover? So if I look down here with that selected, I see that in the transform area here, I'm saying that the scale should be 1.1 in the X and 1.1 in the Y during the hover. If I single click the normal button without the hover applied, in that same area of the transform, I see the scale is 1 in both, not 1.1, but just 1. So just by having that difference between the base state and the hover state, I'm able to get a change to kick in automatically. Now, if I want that change to animate over time, then in the base one, I come down to transition animations and I just give it some time frame. So it was set to 0.2, which is a realistic value, but I'm going to set it to 1. So it's going to change over 1 full second. So it should be a bit more dramatic. And I'll go to my hover and I'll change it to 1.5. So again, it's going to be more dramatic. Then when I come over here, now I'll mouse off of it. Now I mouse on it, and we can see it's getting much, much bigger, and the transition's happening over a longer period of time. So everything I'm showing there is from Web Standards, this idea of states, pseudo classes, and being able to do a transition. And it's super cool that all that just comes for free. Now, you can do really any change that you want. I could also have it, let's say, get a little bit, yeah, I'm in the hover state here. Get a little bit different size. Oh, no, sorry. I'm doing it the wrong way. Let's have it be anchored to one side a little differently. That's going to be way too big. There we go. Just see that one. So now I'm able to have it kind of be anchored differently. You could do a lot of different stuff there. I could have the radius change over time and the color. You can do. So it's kind of fading red and it's kind of moving over. So this looks pretty ugly, but you can do anything, any of the property changes you want, and they'll all be animated. Now, what if you wanted one property to be animated differently than another one? Well, down here in the transition animations, it's currently saying for all of them, do them over 1 second. I could say for the scale, do it over a half a second. And then you'd be able to apply a second transition here and have this be the, let's say, transform origin or whatever the other one, and give it a slightly different duration and a different ease. So you can have more than one difference as you mouse over, and you can have each difference animate differently. So it's pretty good, pretty full amount of stuff there. So that's it for this demo. I'll pop back. We'll look at 2 other ones. So secondly, I wanted to look at this UI Toolkit scene. Let me go back to my familiar sizing layout here. Okay, so back in the scene, this is a new scene. I've got the example toolkit script, which I'll show that in a moment. And then I've got a prefab of the UI document. I just decided to make it a prefab because I wanted to use the same layout in 2 different scenes. One here in this standalone, and then also in the real game. So that's why I decided to make a prefab out of it. But it's basically the same. So let's go ahead and run that and just see how it works. Yep. So here I've got some instructions. It says arrow keys move, spacebar to shoot, the points, the lives, and then a restart button. And when I click the restart button, just for a temporary test, I have it increase the points. So I'm listening to a UI click and I'm updating a value in the points label. So let's see how I do 2 of those. This is the first time we've seen C# interactivity with a layout. So the way that I structured that, I put the C# in 2 spots. One here is on the UI itself. I have my own UI Toolkit view class. I'm opening up my favorite editor here while that's loading. So this one, it's just responsible for doing the queries. I just wanted to keep the queries in one spot. That's my particular convention. You could do it other ways, but that's what I do here. So let's take a look at that. So here. I'm going to make this bigger too, so we can see it a bit better. Okay. So how's that font size there for you guys? Okay. So here we have a mono behavior, the standard class in Unity. And what I decided to do is make a public property here that anytime a system wants to get the label where the points are displayed, it can ask this class. I'll show you where I call this from. And it does this syntax here. So let me make this a little bigger so we can just focus on it. So here, what I'm doing is I'm asking the UI document to give me its root visual element. You're always going to do that part. And then you want to query for something that gets the result you want. So I'm saying query for all the labels in your layout and find one with the name points label. And that's a name that I've given it in the UI builder. So there's some other query syntaxes where I could get a list of labels. I could say, give me all the labels. I could say other stuff, but this is a standard one. And for my use case, this is all I needed, right? Then for the restart button, something very similar. I say, hey, UI document, ask your root visual element, do a query. Now give me the button called restart button. So you manually give it the name you want in UI Builder, and then you manually put that string here in the C#, and that's how you do a lookup. It's pretty straightforward, right? But the query is different, where we're not used to seeing that query in Unity in general. Then I serialize that field so that I'm able to get access at it. And then here in the start, let's take a look at one other thing I do. So now that I can easily get at that restart button, because that query, I take advantage of that. And I say, hey, restart button, let me register a callback. Now, this highlighted text here, you can register callbacks for all sorts of events. But I realized by happenstance that when I clicked the space bar during the runtime game, it was acting like it was clicking my button. And I Googled that and I found that Unity by default has spacebar mapped to some kind of UI Toolkit runtime navigation. I would think enter would be, but for whatever reason, this is the workaround to turn off that connection. So it's a little outside the scope of this example, but if you wanted to register callbacks to a button to listen to the click, it's a similar kind of syntax. And I'll show you that down here. So now let's see the second script that I mentioned. So here in the scene, which every time I click the restart button, it increments the points. Here's the mono behavior that handles that. So what I do here is I serialize a field to the last class I just showed you. So we have two mono behaviors here, one that's called the view and one that's the example itself. I set my points to be 0 to begin with so that it shows 0 points. Down here, I ask my own custom script, hey view, get a reference to that restart button. And then here's how you subscribe to, you can use that last syntax, but for very common use cases, Unity helps you out here. So let's see what they give me for free. If I hit a button control and then I hit dot, it allows me to say, is it clickable? Yes or no. It can do some binding. Again, that's editor only binding, so we'll skip it for now. Is it focusable? So like some layouts, you might want things to be able to be kind of selected or focused. There's a bunch of other properties you can get at, but the key event here is clicked. So for a button, if it's clicked, you want to use a callback here. And then down here, when that callback happens, this is how I increment the value. I have my own points value. That's just my own custom int. I increment that. And then I do a lookup and I say, hey, points label, set your text value to points. Now, this syntax here might look a little odd. You may be familiar with seeing it instead a slightly different way. So let me write this other syntax that's quite common, like this. So if you're more familiar with the second highlighted one, this is how you can add two strings together. You can say show the word points and then add the actual value to points after it. Some devs like that. If you begin a string with a $sign like this, then you're able to mix together variables within the string itself in just a slightly different way. And I can say, for example, always have it be 3 digits long. Even if the value is 1, it will show 001. If the value is 50, it'll show 050. So I just like that other syntax. It's existed in Unity for a long time, doesn't really have anything to do with UI Toolkit, but that's it. So let me look at the scene again and just show how this gets all glued together, and then I'll pause for any questions. So since I tweaked a couple lines there, it's recompiling. So again, my scene structure here is I have my example mono behavior, which is the second one we looked at. I have a dragged reference in to the UI Toolkit view, which is my first custom class I looked at, and then the UI document. So those are the 3 elements there. And then I'll just play it again just to see that it still works. I'm clicking the restart button and it's ticking up. Now this is a fictitious example. You wouldn't really have clicking restart give you points, but I just wanted to use our limited elements here and have it all happen together. So let's pause there for a second. You guys have any questions about what I showed there before I move into this in a game context? Yep.
So there was a callback to your restart button on the play. What I don't quite understand the syntax of the plus equal.
Okay. Yeah, very good question. So in some Unity systems, they have something that looks like add listener, and you do this. Now that's red because that doesn't exactly work in this context, but in the Unity event system, they would look something like this. So is this a little more familiar to you? Okay, there's like 3 ways to do it. But the way that this works is in the Unity UI Toolkit system, in order to subscribe to these, you always use plus equals to add a listener, and you use minus equals to remove a listener. If you've never seen that before, it seems very weird because plus equals and minus equals is usually how you change a value of an int. Like down here, I use something like that to increment points up. But this is the way to do it. So plus equals to is like add event listener, minus equals is like remove it. This is a C# feature that for whatever reason in this system, the developers decided to use that particular flavor. I prefer the add listener and remove listener. Go ahead.
Sorry. And where are you assigning the function to be actually unclickable? This is it.
This is it. So the 2 pieces of important is this is subscribing to it. And the latter part of that line is the name of the function that it's going to be married to. And then here's the declaration of that one. So this is what will be called and executed every time you click.
Okay.
Cool. Questions, comments, anybody else? Okay. We're good. Now let's move forward. So the third of our 4 things I'm going to show you here is now let's look at that same exact UI, but inside the game itself. So I created several scenes here as part of a different demo, talking about Unity technology in general. And then I added the UI toolkit to it so that I could reuse it. So here we have a game. It does have some sound, but I don't know if you guys are going to be able to hear it, and that's fine. So in this, we have that familiar UI at the top, and I'm using the left, right, down arrow keys to move my ship around. We've got some scrolling background there, and then might be a little confusing why we kind of see it twice, so let me make that adjustment. So here we go. So I'm moving around, and then if I hit spacebar, it creates a rocket with some particle effects. And every time I'm shooting a rocket, the points value at the top is changing. So again, a bit of a fictitious example here. You probably wouldn't earn points just by shooting a rocket, but it's just a simple example. And the lives is hard-coded. That's something that if you want to tweak this when we get to the assignments, you could actually make the lives function, but currently it's just hard-coded to 3 and never changes. And then if I click the restart button, it restarts the whole scene and plays a sound. So that's it there. So now I'll show the code for making this happen. So the structure of the scene is similar. We've got the ship in the background, some new elements. But as far as the UI, we have the same exact prefab. So this is the UI document and my custom UI view. We'll pop into the UI view in a moment. And then I have the example script here. The example script has a lot of stuff happening because it's more about Unity game dev beyond the scope of just UI Toolkit. So we've got some different movement values you can tweak here in the editor to talk more about serialized fields and things that are out of today's scope. But importantly for us, there's a reference to the UI Toolkit. So this represents basically the game itself, and the game needs to connect to the UI, so I drag a reference in. So let's take a look at this game script here, which is a script we haven't seen yet. So this is a mono behavior. We've got a lot of serialized fields for all those unique values. We'll skip talking about those. But here is the UI Toolkit view class. So just like previously, this is the wrapper that does the queries. Let's see where I use that. Well, here in the start, just like the last demo, I listen to the button click using that weird plus equal syntax. Then down here, where I'm going to scroll past a bunch of stuff, Here, when I actually click the restart button, this is the consequence. I play a sound using my own custom audio manager, and then I change the scene to the same scene. This is a hack to just reload the game, so to speak. And I do that using Unity's built-in scene manager. So that's it for this. Is there anything in this code that you want to take a look at or any questions about how this works? Cool. So one thing I wanted to mention before we move into, I'll just create a UI document from scratch. That's the final part of the demo, is that we could see that from the standalone UI scene and the full game scene using the UI, that the UI looks the same, which is by design. So I've got the points, the lives, the restart in this scene. And if I'll just load the other scene. Here it's the same, the points, the UI. So a really nice illustration of the fact that this UI is so portable is you can have two different scenes showing the UI. Now, it's a similar workflow that we're used to with prefabs in general, but people tuning in here may have different levels of familiarity with Unity. So I just think that's something cool to show. I would imagine honoring the same workflow where, let's say I make this Asteroids game have a front menu and a pause menu and a much more complex HUD. I would have the game scene where all that happens together. Then I would have a dedicated scene for just the main menu and a dedicated scene for just the pause menu. Because I think it is useful to look at them while you're working on just the pause menu to just see it in isolation. So that's just a workflow that I like to do where I reuse the layout twice in the core game experience and then also in kind of a temporary standalone scene. So that's the last point I'd mention there. So let's pretend we were in a brand new empty project and see what we would do to create a new UI. So we're about to end the demo portion, and you guys are going to be doing exactly these steps when you fool around with the project. I will also link you to the same steps, so you don't have to memorize them. There'll be some help for you. But let's see what we would do. So we would right-click in the scene, and we'll create an empty game object. I'm just going to choose to call that UI document. Then in the components, I'm going to add the UI document. And this is saying you need to have panel settings added if you don't already. So let's just pretend I didn't already have panel settings to drag in. So in the project, I'll right-click. There's two things we're going to need. We're going to need the UI Toolkit panel settings. So I'm going to create one of those. And then I'm going to come back to the same menu in a second, and I'll create a UI document. So here in the panel settings, there it's done. That one's done. And then I'll right click, create UI Toolkit. And there's lots of other stuff we could create here, but we only need the UI document. Okay, so now I have those two assets created. And if I was in an empty project, those are the only two that I would need to make the following step happen. I click UI document, I drag in the panel settings, I click the layout that was just created, and I put that in the source asset spot. And now we're ready to rock. Now, in game here, live, it is showing me the result of that. But notice the result is empty. It's because we don't have any UI yet. So by double clicking the source asset in the inspector, or by double clicking the source asset down here, we'll be able to open the UI builder. Before I do that, let me just click on the panel settings here and show the panel settings. So this may look familiar to you if you're used to the old system's canvas. You're able to say things like, should it scale with the screen size or constant pixel size? So there's kind of a whole art and science into how you should choose the values for here. For today, you could just leave it the default and you'd be fine. My personal flavor is I like to do scale with screen size. I like to do shrink. And then I like to specify the same resolution that I have my window set. But I'm not even sure that's the best, but I kind of like that flow. So you can do that, or you can just leave it the defaults. Now, let's go and double click on there, and we see this here. So while I'm here, I'll mention something that there's a couple systems that over the years that Unity's added, which really demand a lot of screen real estate in order to make use of. One of them is shader graph, another VFX graph, and then this one, UI builder. You can see that this is a lot of stuff in this one window. So a hack is if you have a second screen, drag it up to that second screen. If you don't have a second screen, just this week, I had an aha moment about how to solve it. It's a popular one, but I didn't know about it. So what you do here is you create a Unity layout, one without this on screen and one with it on screen. So if you're not familiar with how to create layouts, you basically drag and drop stuff the way you want. You come up to this window in the upper right and you choose Save Layout and you give it a name. Then you tweak it a little bit, hit Save Layout and give it a second name. Now I have a slide to share in a moment that goes over these steps because I think it's so useful for today. But then after you do that, you come up to Edit and you go to Shortcuts. And then you come down here and you find the command for toggling to that layout and give it a keyboard shortcut. So I can hit Control-1 and it shows me my base layout. And I hit Control-2 and it shows me the UI builder on top. So I don't regularly have to wrestle with that. So here's the window here. I think the old school way I would do it on one screen is like work a little bit and then drag something gigantic and then work a little bit, you know, but this is nicer. I can position it and I just hit Control-1 and there it is without, and I hit Control-2 and there it is with. So now that that's open, again, here's my empty document. Let's see what I want to do here. I'd say the first thing that you want to do is drag out a visual element. And I usually call that one, you can double click or you can hit F2, I think renames. And I usually call that screen or contents. I'm still figuring out my conventions, but I call that screen. And then I put everything as a child of that so that if I want to do a nice border around everything, it becomes easier this way. So let's pretend I have my screen there as the main use case. And then I'm just going to drag in 3 visual elements here like this. And I'm going to rename the top one to header. And rename the middle one to body. You can name them anything you want, but these are just kind of borrowed from some popular layout names. So notice when I mouse over them, I get the different hovering, right? Of the entire blue area, or just the header, or just the footer, or just the body in the middle. Now, if I click on the root XML node, it doesn't give me the full list of properties because it's not a visual element. But it does let you do one really cool thing, which is set the default size. So you can either set a size that is just convenient for you, or you can just drag here and set it here, or you can click Match Game View. Now, if I do that, then whatever the size is here, it will match it here. It's zoomed out, so we can't quite see it, but let's say like this. Oh, I guess I have to... Maybe I have to save. It's not quite updating how I wanted. Okay. Oh, I had to save my scene. Nope, still not doing it. I'm a little okay. Because I have the resolution hard-coded here, even as I'm scaling it around, it doesn't actually change it. But if I go to free aspect, that's the result I was thinking of. So if your game scene is set to free aspect, then you can see the viewport in the UI builder automatically tweak. That's one workflow. I was a little confused, but I prefer to just hard code it to one layout, which is just a little easier. And then, yeah, we don't get the same. So just, I'm glad I had that forgetful moment there, just to remind you the connection between the game view and the viewport here. So let's see, what else I want to do? Let's go to the body here, and let's just give this a background color, because there's another aha moment that happens when you change. There's lots of values here to play with. But if I go to background, yeah. If I change the color here, notice the background doesn't change. I Googled about this because I thought it was quite confusing. Usually Unity has the default behavior be the most conspicuous, but this is an example where they decided not to have it be the most conspicuous. And it's just that their colors are always alpha 0, and you just have to drag the alpha slider up. I had that snafu just minutes ago with the border I was setting. I don't know if you recall, but whenever you're setting a color in the color picker, you always need to move the alpha up. Not sure why, not sure if there's a way to change that, but it's just a little thing to notice. So now you can see that I've got my header, I've got my body, and I've got the footer here. Let's just talk about the box layout. So if I go to my screen here and I go to align here, I can set them to align in different ways. I can justify the contents in different ways. I can change the alignment different ways using the inspector, or because it's such an important value, there's hot buttons up here at the top. So I can change the flex direction, for example. So if I click this, yeah, there we go. So I'm going to hover over here and it says flex direction. Okay, it doesn't tell me, but there's a rightwards arrow. If I click it again, there's a leftwards arrow. So now it's reverse order. Let me make that a little more obvious by making my header here have a red. Remember to touch the alpha. There we go. So again, on the screen here. So just by clicking this value, it's going left to right, right to left, top to bottom, bottom to top. So you can tweak that behavior that way. Then there's some shortcuts to the alignments, justify, align, etc. If you wanted the middle one to be bigger, for example, you can go to the flex area, and that's your first place that you should be tweaking size differences. Instead of hard coding, middle one should be 50 wide. You want to keep the liquid layout principle in mind and go to the flex settings. Flex settings suggest a relative difference in sizing. So if I make this one be, let's say, growing by 2, now relative to its siblings, it's going to try and take up twice the width. There's a whole science and art in how Flexbox works, and I'm still learning it. But again, you want to hit these top buttons to change the justification, and then go into the flex settings and tweak grow or shrink. And there's also shortcuts to those same directions there. And I think that's all we need for this first example that we're going to do. If you did want to hard code a value of size, you can come down to somewhere there is size. So here you'd be able to say, no, I want exactly a certain size. So on that note, glad I thought to do that. If I change this to like 500, here next to a lot of the numerical values, not all, it lets you choose pixels percentage. So you can have this be 500 pixels wide, 500% wide, which would be very big. Or you can set it to auto or initial. Now, I'm not really sure what auto and initial, what the differences are, but by default, a lot of these are set to auto. So I guess that is like the parent container gets to decide or something like that. So let's stop there and let you guys play around with this. We are, about 2 hours in. So we'll try and dedicate this last hour to you guys playing with 2 different examples, and I'll assign those next. But do you have any questions about what we've seen here? Okay. Anybody? I heard somebody come off mic. Do you have a question? No? Okay.
No, just really a comment. I was just going to say that, I hope I can remember anything.
Okay, fair enough. I will link you to a step-by-step of creating a new scene. All right, so let's come back to the slides here. That is the end of our first slides, concluding what is UI, why is UI Toolkit cool, going over some of the principles of it, and also a little demo there that we did. So let's do a couple minute break. I'll ask you guys, I mean, you can just leave your cam on if you want and just walk away. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna mute myself, just take a quick break and grab another coffee, and we'll come back in a couple minutes and continue.